This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with David Gleave, Master of Wine, at the Great Hall in Toronto for the Hobbs Portfolio Tasting. How are you today, sir?
Very well, thank you, Jamie.
Now, I actually met David many years ago. He taught one or two of my diploma classes at the Glasgow School of Food Technology, and he also hosted a couple of wine dinners at the restaurant, the Atrium in Edinburgh, where I worked for many a year. So it's wonderful to see this gentleman in Toronto once again. But David is no stranger to Toronto, having actually been born and bred in Toronto. Isn't this true, sir?
It is. The accent doesn't sound very Toronto these days, but I was brought up here and lived here till I was about 21, and then decided that travelling was a bit more interesting than going to university, so I thought I'd go away for a while and I would come back and finish university. But sort of 35 years later, I'm still travelling.
And what were you reading at university?
English and philosophy.
Oh, there you go. And how did your life turn, and how did you become interested in wine, David?
Well, when I had finished travelling through Europe and down to Israel and then came back to London, I thought London in early 1979 was a bit more exciting than coming back to university. So I decided to stay there for a while, and I got a job. I was singularly ill-qualified to do anything. So I got a job working in a bar, and a couple of jobs later I was working in a pub that had a fantastic selection of wines. In Dublin, of all places, and so I got sort of tinkering around with these bottles during the quiet afternoons and thought, well, I'd like to know more about this subject. So I went out and bought Hugh Johnson's book, Wine, and sort of dove into that and thought this is a pretty interesting thing. So it just sort of all steamrolled from there, really.
Can you remember the first bottle of wine that gave you your, I guess, an epiphany, and it made you realise that wine was a little bit more than a beverage that one could consume to become a little tiddly?
There are probably several of them. I mean, I still remember as a younger man here in Toronto drinking an old bottle of Reserva Ducale from Rufino, which was a wonderful wine. It was, we didn't drink a lot of wine at home, but we would on sort of special occasions, and we had this Chianti. Which was wonderful. And so that's partly, I think, what steered me towards Italian wine, because being brought up in Toronto in the 1960s and 70s, Italian wines were everywhere. And it was only when I went to England that they tried to sort of disabuse me of the notion that Italian wines were on par with France. But then I remember one of the wines I bought from the pub I was working from in Dublin. And what amazed me was they had these 69 and 71 vintage Domaine bottled Burgundies from Alexis Lechine, who was a real pioneer, went around with a mobile bottling line, selected some wines and bottled them at the Domaine. And it was a 1969, I think it was a Vosne Romanée. And it was remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And that just spurred me further down the route of wine.
Now, over the years, you have specialised in the wines of Italy, and your name is synonymous with I guess, the English, British wine trade and Italy. Was there anything in particular that drew you towards Italy and drew you towards the study of Italian wine?
I think that Italian wines were very underdeveloped in the UK trade in those days, in sort of the mid-1980s. And the UK trade hadn't recognised what was happening in Italy. There was this amazing revolution happening, which had started in the late 70s and was starting to filter down at that time. And there were some exciting new wines coming along and some exciting young producers. And I was lucky enough to be able to taste some of those wines through just some of the people I was working with at the time. We had a lot of interest in Italian wines. So that, I think, sort of spurred me down further down that route of Italian wine. And a very wise comment from my boss at the time, who said, go to Italy. He says, because it's everyone in the UK trade wants to go to France. No one's doing Italy, and it's going to be an exciting country of the future. And that was how right he was.
Now, where do you feel Italy is these days? The modern Italian wine industry, you're actually going on to present a seminar concerning this later today, but where do you think they stand right now? And how have things changed in your mind?
I think the Italian industry has changed dramatically in the last some 30 years. I think, back then Italy was producing, almost 80 million hectolitres of wine a year. In the 2012 vintage, they produced just over 39 million hectolitres. So it's about half what they were producing 30 years ago. So I think that's, we're seeing less wine being produced, probably better wine. I think in those days there was a tremendous amount of wine being produced of fairly low quality at the bottom end of the market, and a small amount of wine being produced at the top end of the market, but very little in between. And I think what excites me most about Italy today, yes, of course, the great wines at the top, the great Brunellos or Barolos or top Chiantis or Amarones. But I think, as a buyer, it's always more exciting to find the wines in that mid-sector of the market, because that's what people want to drink, and I think it's what's driven the rise in consumption of, say, New World wines in the last couple of decades. They've done a great job of giving us good quality in the mid-price market. I think Italy has really, the Italian wines have come on so much and are filling a lot of that mid-sector at the moment, and I think that's why they're being so successful.
Now, speaking of the New World, when you originally founded your company, Liberty Wines, you specialised in Italian producers, but you then went on to bring in some of the top producers from both Australia, and now you deal with New Zealand as well. You actually make some wine over there. What was it that drew you towards those two countries in particular?
I suppose it's the same thing that draws me towards areas in Italy or France or other countries, which is the potential, I think, of undeveloped sites. I'm involved with a vineyard in Heathcote in Australia, which is a remarkable area and has some of the oldest soils on earth, very low vigour, and it become known for one particular style of Shiraz. But I think the people that my partners at Greenstone, a viticulturist and a winemaker, we all felt that there was a potential there to produce another style that was more, for want of a better word, European. Lovely tannin, acid, freshness, but with that great ripeness you get out of Australia. So it was exciting to go in and develop that and see that style come to fruition.
And in New Zealand?
Similar, I think. I was very interested in working with Pinot Noir, as was a very good friend of mine, an excellent winemaker called Matt Thompson, who spends a lot of he is from New Zealand, he lives in Marlborough, and he said, I think Marlborough could do a very good job with Pinot Noir. And this was 13, 14 years ago. He said, everyone's focused on Sauvignon now, but there are certain sites where the soils aren't right for Sauvignon, but are much better for Pinot Noir.
David, thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today, and we look forward to your seminar later today.
Thank you, Jamie.
Bye-bye.